Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me back there? Can you hear me? Yes. Oh, okay. Well, let's begin with the prayer to the Holy Spirit on the prayer card that you received. Let us pray together. O Holy Spirit, Paraclete, perfect in us the work begun by Jesus. Enable us to continue to pray fervently in the name of the whole world. Hasten in every one of us the growth of a deep interior life. Give vigor to our apostolate so that it may reach all peoples, all redeemed by the blood of Christ and all belonging to him. Let no earthly bond prevent us from honoring our vocation, no cowardly considerations to serve the claims of justice, no meanness confine the immensity of charity within the narrow bounds of petty selfishness. Let everything in us be on a grand scale, the search for truth and the devotion to it, and readiness for self-sacrifice, even to the cross and death. And may everything finally be according to your will, O Holy Spirit of love, which the Father and the Son desire to be poured out over the Church and its institutions, over each and every human soul, and over nations. Amen. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Our fourth session, and just a very brief review. Remember that the Acts of the Apostles is a very short story, really, of the growth of the infant church in the Roman Empire, but it's only a sketch, and what happened was far more inclusive and far more penetrating. But it's a picture, and it gives us a portrait of how one grouping of people in that first age understood the religion. So, once again, to remember that the way that the story was put together is most important. That there is no way in which we can correlate what the Acts is about with any other written document. There just isn't any. So it stands by itself. And that means that, especially in the first 15 chapters, it's very much the creation of Luke. And in the rest of the chapters, when we get to Paul, we have points of correlation with the letters that Paul wrote himself, especially the letter to the Galatians. So there's a way in which we can take Acts and then take a look at a letter that Paul wrote and see how they either do or do not fit together. So how is the work then put together? Well, I invited you last time to take a look at that triangle. And when you get a look at the triangle on the inside, what does the author have? Well, he has the Old Testament, he has the Gospel of Mark, perhaps some of the letters of Paul. He has hymns. Sometimes we forget that. The way in which the story of Jesus was passed on was in hymns. And we see some of them written, especially in the book of Revelation, beautiful hymns in the book of Revelation. And then also in Colossians and Ephesians and in the Philippians as well. And there we get a sense, of the prayer life of the early Christians, how it focused on Jesus. And then in stories. And so the stories were caught up. And then in the sayings of Jesus, and then Luke's imagination. Because it's up to Luke to take all these elements together and say, well, what were his goals? And his goal was to validate the action of God, first of all, in the gospel narrative called Luke, in Jesus, and then to validate the action of God in the early church, especially in Peter and Paul and the other apostles. So this is how his goal, and it was written for those who already were Christians. It was not written as an evangelistic tool. It was written to solidify the faith of those first Christian people, to have them recover and deepen the sense of commitment that they had. So that's very important. And remember, some of the things that we find in Luke especially were the speeches. And the speeches especially were creations of Paul, again, from all the input that he had from the sources that we talked about. And Paul put those speeches, and in the Hellenistic writing of his day, it was expected that the author of the book would put the speeches together. They aren't verbatim or remembrances of the past, and that's why, like the speech that Luke creates for Paul, rather for Peter, is almost identical to the one for Peter. And it's the kerygma of Jesus. What he said, what he did, how he lived, how he died, and rose again. And the heart of the thing is resurrection faith. That is the thing that all through the Acts of the Apostles is going to be the source of the teaching and the works of power of the disciples. It didn't come from the human element. It came from the resurrection, the power of the resurrection acting in those people. So that's most important that we get that. And then we remember that the speeches that Luke wrote, really when he's speaking, or when Peter is speaking to the people at the first Pentecost, or when Paul is speaking to the people at Athens, really the author isn't trying to tell us what Peter or Paul said at that time. The author is trying to tell us this is what he's saying to you. This is what he's saying to you. So we get away from the historicity, because see, our world is all concerned with the historicity. Like there are a group of theologians, most of them Protestant, and a couple Catholics, but they try to find the exact historical event that took place, whether we're talking about the gospel or Acts. And you can't do it. It's arbitrary. So what they're trying to do is it's an impossible task, no matter what norms they use for defining which are actual things or not. First of all, it's asking the wrong question. The question is not what happened. The question is, what does it mean? And once we understand that, then a lot of clouds disappear from us. But then a lot of people say, yeah, but. There's no yeah, but. No, there's no such thing. You're asking the wrong kind of question. And so once we understand that, then we're able to pursue the correct understanding that the author intended. Not what we want, and not what modern kind of historians want. What does the author want? What is he trying to get across? Okay, any questions at all for anything that we've had so far? Anything at all? There's no such thing as a stupid question. Yes?
It was interesting, somewhat at some point, later on in Acts, all of a sudden he changes his pronoun, and he talks of himself as we.
Yes, that's interesting. He does that in chapter 16 and again in 22 and 24. And many people think that when he's talking about we, he is really the one who accompanied Paul in it. But again, it's just a creation of the author. It's possible, but it's not important. And those are people who are always trying to get Luke the physician. Luke, they're trying to connect that with the we, see. But the scholars say it's not important. It's just an attempt but here's what is important, and that is Paul never works by himself. Paul always works with other people. There are never, he doesn't, in his journeys, in his teaching, there are always other people involved in this. And that is important, see, because again, that is part of the way in which the faith is both understood and passed on. And so you don't have just Paul, but you have Barnabas and Silas, and then you have Aquila and Priscilla, and you have men and women, see? And so along with that might come a word that is used frequently in Acts, and that's called prophet or prophetess. Remember, one of the characters has 4 daughters who are prophetesses. I can't think of his name now. But what does that mean? The prophet is the one who strengthens the faith of the people. It is not someone talking about a future reality, although that might occur, but that's secondary. The heart of the prophet is to solidify, to deepen, to connect the faith of the people. So it's a technical kind of word, but we also find it a lot connected, although not only connected with the people who are the elders, but you notice that too in the Acts of the Apostles, that they're very quick to talk about how he appointed elders in all the communities where they visited. Now that is important. Why? Because the elders are the point of reference, external point of reference of the communities one with another. And because it shows again the levels of decision making in the church, but never in the Acts of the Apostles. The only one place where James makes a decision about Gentiles, but that's the only exception. But in all the other places, it's always done in concert with others. It's always collegial and collaborative. And when they talk about the elders and the presbytery, which is another term for priest or bishop, it's always done and with the entire people. So the whole thing, it's supposed to be, we talked about that. It's supposed to have that kind of circle in which all the believers in the community have an insight. Why? Because the Spirit is given to each one, not just sort of pricing out like a Coca-Cola label, but rather it's the uniqueness of each one. Like each one in this gathering, we have all different kind of lives, even though they may seem to be similar, and they are to a degree, but we're all different as well. And we not only have different opportunities, different challenges, but we have different kind of ways in which we have come to appropriate the message. And that's very important because when the church has been real heavy-handed with authority, they're more than any place else were they wrong. That's where they were most wrong in the history of the church, when authority is the only point of reference. It is a point of reference, but should not be the point of reference. And we get that from the Acts of the Apostles, and we can validate that historically. Look how long it took for the church. Finally, we did it before most of the other Protestant churches, but before we were able to accept the fact of evolution. Why? Because authority said no. See, and that was the only good reason. There was no other good reason for it. Or in understanding the sacred scriptures, when the biblical theologians were hesitant to have a critical understanding, the kind you're getting now from the Acts of the Apostles, a critical understanding of sacred scripture, because authority said no. And it took a long time for them to admit the teaching of the scholars and to say, yes, it's the scholars, and they validate what they're doing in a scientific way. The study of words, the study of culture, this co-relationship of one book with another. We talked about that in the last class, I know, what it takes to be a scripture scholar, the depth of knowledge and wisdom that they have to have, that nobody who's just doing what I'm doing, a teacher, cannot ever claim that he or she is a scholar, unless you write the books, let them be critiqued by your peers, and have the background for being able to understand what's taking place. Now, I listened to a woman scholar from Catholic Theological Union, and I listened to her tapes, and she approaches this actually completely different from this scholar, Luke Timothy Johnson. They're not opposed, they just approach it in much different ways, and they come out with different kind of focus. Follow me? So it's most important. So the point, though, is that when authority is the only point of reference, the church usually then is really, maybe they walk in unison, but even like when authority was most in control of the Second World War, look what happened. No one spoke about the morality of the Holocaust, because the bishops were looking at Rome, and Rome was looking at the bishops, because there's too much authority. And so I think that, and even in the local church, when you have too much authority and not an inclusion of the people who are also involved in the decision making, that's when you get problems. And that's when the individual, like some of the best priests we've had in this diocese were people who stood up to the cardinals, including Bernardine, and stood up and said, wait a moment. And they were the ones that should have been listened to. And that's true of the people as well. And the people then, they turn away. They say, oh, well, let them make the decisions, leave it alone. But it's not like that now. I don't think so. I think not. It's not like that now. All right, I probably got off on the wrong kick again. My anti-authority kick. For which I am eternally grateful to God. So, because you get in a little trouble, but they respect you too. You know, we did things here at Holy Spirit long years ago. Remember, we had women homilists within 2 years of the parish starting. We had altar service within 2 weeks of the parish starting. And we had other things that we did that way we won't go into, but which were far more significant. But downtown knew what we were doing, and they let me alone. Why? Because I go public. That's why, and they knew it. And the other thing is, we weren't trying to be, how would you call it, evangelists to other parishes. What they did in St. Hubert's, what they did in St. Marcelline's, that was their doing. We were only concerned about what was taking place here. And once they knew that you were sort of just that way, they just let you alone. They thought you were a little nuts, but they let us alone. Okay. Any other question about anything that we've had so far? Anything even about that what you read in the passage coming up from chapter 16 to onward? Anything? Okay, so what we've really taken then is the all the way up to the apostle to the Gentiles. But remember, the most important thing that the author had to deal with is the question of accepting Gentiles into the community of faith, and not only that, but accepting them in table fellowship. So it wasn't just a question of having them okayed as Gentile Christians, but allowing and sort of admitting that the Jerusalem Christians, who were very Jewish and who followed again the way of Moses and who worshipped in the temple and accepted the Torah, well, everybody does that, but accepted the Jewish feasts and the like, they were able then to have table fellowship with these Gentile Christians who were not that Jewish and who did not celebrate the Jewish great feast of the Jewish calendar, and who did not have in front of them the temple. Now the temple, by the time the author of Luke, that was long destroyed. The temple was destroyed between the years 67 and 73, but Luke was writing around 85 to 90. All right, and so that was the most important decision ever made in the life of the Christian church. And that's why it took 5 chapters for the author of Luke to separate all the issues and come to the conclusion that was finally accepted, allowing for table fellowship. Now, table fellowship is an ambiguous word. For some Catholic Christians, we say it's the Eucharist. Well, yes, it certainly devolved into that or developed into that, but maybe at the beginning it was just eating with one another, because eating was looked upon as a mark of sort of the acceptance of the values that people had one with another. You just didn't have table fellowship with those who were opposite you. And so that's why it took so long from chapter 10 to chapter 15 to come to that conclusion. And I'd like to read to you what Luke Timothy Johnson says. He said, slowly, subtly but surely, the author uses the apostles' statements to shape a new definition of, quote, the people of God, unquote, as one based on messianic faith, rather than on ethnic origin or ritual observance. The author establishes as a fundamental principle that the church's responsibility is not to dictate God's action, but discern it, not to close the scriptures to further interpretation, but to open them. And so that is going to continue on. This kind of sense of the interpretation of the sacred scriptures as scholarship becomes even deeper than it is now. And we get the fruit of the scholars' writings. We will come to even a deeper understanding of the sacred scriptures than we have now. That means it's not closed. It's not the end of the line. Like the way in which I have been learning scripture over these many years is utterly different from the way that I learned it in the seminary. Not just other, but different and contradictory. And so that was the accepted way back in the Middle Ages. And so now we've come to a point where it's much more sophisticated, much more nuanced. And we don't have the stupidity of saying, well, the Bible says, as though it's the last word. It ain't the last word. And maybe the Bible didn't even say that. So maybe the words did, but maybe when you take the broader understanding, maybe it's not there. So always we have to have that. We tread upon, it's something similar to the way in which modern medicine has evolved. Look at the way it's evolved in the last 40 years. Nothing like it prior to that. And so there's a kind of deepening understanding, and it's the work of the Spirit. And we Catholics, maybe others too, I don't know. But we Catholics also say, well, even in the secular sciences, all the progress that we've made, it's the Holy Spirit of God that always is pushing people on to truth. No matter what the truth might be, no matter what brand of knowledge or work it is, it's the Holy Spirit that's leading us. And that's a very important kind of understanding, because we realize that we haven't captured the Holy Spirit. That the Holy Spirit has always been involved in the life of God's people. We approach it with awe and with wonder and with gratitude, and we thank God for the gift of the Spirit, by which we come to understand more fully the meaning of Jesus. But we also understand that the Spirit works in other ways. All right. And so that's the other thing that comes through. Sorry. So he says he asserts unequivocally that the authentic people of God is one in which all nations can share as equals, and that since God has shown himself to be without discrimination, so must the church itself. And those of us who are older, we know how discrimination was the name of the game way back when. Not just with blacks, but it was even ethnic pride. I mean, we had such a thing of ethnic pride. And as I told you, when I was first ordained, I was in this one parish where we had 8 ethnic groups within our parish boundaries. 8. We had Slovenian, French, even French, which is most unusual, Polish, Italian, German, on and on. 3 more. And Lithuanian, yeah, right. Any other group that I missed? Irish. Oh, Irish are everywhere. I mean, they're everywhere. You can't get away from them. Ours was supposedly Holy Rosary Irish. So we were supposedly the ethnic parish, but most of our people were not Irish. But you know what I'm getting at. And all these enclaves, they had these little churches and people attending them, and the Lithuanians wouldn't go to the Poles, and the Poles wouldn't go to the Germans, and the Germans wouldn't go to the French. You know what I'm saying? We were pretty bound up with ethnicity. And despite the tragedy of the Second World War, that all has broken down. Look what's happened in the European Union. That somehow these people who were at war with each other every 30 years have been at peace for all this time since the Second World War. They've been at peace, especially the Germans, pushing the unity of the European Union. Why? Because they, more than other people, recognize the terrible evil of what occurred in the First World War and in the Second World War. I remember one time when I went to Europe in 1969, yeah, and we took a trip down the Rhine River, and you can get off at different stops, you know, and we got off this one stop, and we went there. We stayed 2 days. We expected to stay and the second day I went through the little cemetery they had there. 3 generations of German men had died in the Second World War. 3 generations. So this is impressed on them so much more so than a lot of other peoples. And so that deep, profound sense of breaking down ethnicity. So having, like someone said, yeah, America first, but not only. So that whole thrust, you know, of an exaggerated nationalism is contrary to the teaching of not only of the gospel, but the explicit teaching of the church in the last many years. That the church has come out very strongly against this thing. Why? Because it somehow the third world nations are at a loss for food and for even for water, and so they're really understands that. So it's the unity that we have as human beings first of all, and then as Christians, that is so very important, and that's going to be found in the Acts of the Apostles too. That sense of unity that is preeminent underneath all that takes place in the Acts. Any questions on that or disagreements, Joe? Yes.
Just the only thing I think I read real quickly read 16 to 24, and it seems like that's with the start of the Jewish Christian problems, where they started to, you know, some of the Jewish wanted them to, if they weren't following the Jewish way, there was no good. So if you went to Gentiles and the Christians and you didn't have to go through the circumcision and all the other stuff, then that, according to the Jews, that was bad, but according to the Christians, they were saying, no, the Jews should.
That's a very good point, Leon. And so some try to see in both the gospel narrative and in Acts anti-Semitism, but it's really not there. Because what happened is that in every place that Paul went, he goes first to the synagogue. First to the synagogue, and he tries to open the door there. And in Romans, which we're not studying now, but in Romans he said he would give his life for his brethren who were the children of the covenant. And so, but you had there was the diminishing number of Jews becoming Christians, and more Jews who are mixing in with the larger number of Gentile Christians, marrying them like occurs in our society, you know, marrying them, and so lessening their sense of being Jewish. See? And because then in the Gentile Jews didn't have in front of them the law and the feasts, especially the feasts. They didn't have the celebration that they had. And even after the temple was destroyed, Jewish people, the Jews of the synagogue, celebrated those 3 great celebrations of Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. They had and they still continue to celebrate it. The Jewish Christians did, but the Gentile Christians never did, and the Jews living in the diaspora tended not to do it either. So there was a growing kind of antipathy by the very fact that the separation of the lesser number of Jews becoming Christians and the larger number becoming Gentiles. But rather, whether or not anti-Semitism began, it didn't begin there, because even in the Acts of the Apostles, you'll find evidences of the Gentiles, not the pagan Gentiles, of their antipathy toward Jews. You know, even when the proconsuls are investigating Paul, and they say, that's just your religion, you know, those are just you Jews. See, so you find it's always been there. So it wasn't created by the Christians, but somehow, in a sense, it was continued on for these historical things of which I mentioned. But always, even in the people in Rome, Paul didn't evangelize Rome, you know. Christians were in Rome before Paul ever got there. And they think that Rome was probably evangelized somewhere around the year maybe 42, 43, and they don't know who did it. But they just know that this emerging group of apostles, disciples, who were enthused with the message of Jesus, that they went as far as Rome too. And so when Paul finally got to Rome, he wasn't creating anything. Even one guy, scholar, Father Brown, he said Paul had the courage, even though he never saw what Roman Christians were like, he had the nerve to tell them what they should be about. You know, so that was Paul. See, Paul had that sense of mission. So does that address your question, though?
Yeah, I still think I'll have to read further, but.
Oh, yeah, there are evidences of it.
That was where the rift was beginning.
Oh, the rift was, yeah. But the rift doesn't necessarily mean.
The Christians, the Jews didn't like the Christians, and the Christians didn't like the Jews.
Well, I didn't see that in the book. What I saw was that the Jewish, the Jews of the synagogue who were converted, they became very fervent Christians.
Right.
But I don't see any antipathy between them and the Gentile Christians. See, not between Christians. There were differences that they had to surmount, but there wasn't the anti-Semitism that we see evidence as the history went on. As history went on, there's no question,
Yeah.
but that Christians were very prejudiced against Jews. No question. And of course, the other thing was true as well, is that a group of rabbis got together at Jamnia on the east coast of the Mediterranean, just east of Jerusalem, and they excommunicated anybody who became Messianists. They excommunicated them from the synagogue.
Oh, okay.
All right? So it's not just a one-way street.
Yeah. No, it wasn't, I think it was.
No,
it was street,
no.
like that's where the rift.
Oh, there were then antipathies, but there was a rift long before that between Jews and Gentiles. There just was in the ancient world, in the Mediterranean world, of which this Christianity was a part. There was tremendous antipathy towards Jews. One time, Claudius kicked them out of Rome. Kicked them out of Rome. I forget what year that was, 59 or something like that. He kicked them out of Rome because they were Jews. See? And he thought they were causing troubles. And that's when Lydia, the trader in purple goods, whom Paul met, that's how she got kicked out of Rome. See? And so he met her, I think, I forget what, Philippi, I think. But anyhow, that's where, because the Jews got, so that's a real evidence of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
You know? So it's not, but the only thing is that Christianity at its best is supposed to be a unifier. See? And this is something that we only have come to understand and appreciate in relatively modern times. But then we were against one another too.
Yeah, okay.
You know, look, a mixed marriage was between a Pole and an Irishman. You know?
Or a Lutheran and a Catholic, they couldn't even talk to each other.
Oh, that's different. Remember the joke about Robert Kennedy when he said one of his kids was dating a black girl, and he said, "I hope she's a Catholic." See, because that's a terrific statement.
Yeah.
Why? Because it transcends color. See? So we have a long way to go, but we should be the ones to put aside this stuff, you know, for all kinds of reasons, historical and theological and a faith. That this should be such a secondary thing to us. I'm lucky. I grew up in a family where my dad, I don't know why, but he never wanted to live in an Irish neighborhood. So he kept moving. When the Irish came here, he moved. So that's the way he was. He just, you know, he said, a lot of baloney, you know. So if you were lucky, you grew up with that in that kind of an atmosphere where somehow prejudice wasn't part of your life.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that some of you weren't that lucky.
You have to be lucky to grow up in
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, or so proud of their Irish, you know. Well, it's okay, fine. You know. I used to tell this one guy who was a rabid Irishman who sat in back of me at Quigley, his name was Keating. I used to tell him that I was really English, not Irish. That drove him nuts, you know. So, all right, but anyhow, it's in the Acts, though, so we're not talking on something that's not in there. Anything else, anything other from what you discovered from reading 16 to 22? Anything? Yes.
Just seems like there's an awful lot of traveling.
Oh, yeah.
Is that historical?
That is historical, and that's one of the beauties. See, that's one of the beautiful things about the Roman Empire at that time. They had roads. They had a tremendous crisscrossing of roads, and they had tremendous. Their sea voyages were devoid of pirates. They got rid of the pirates. The Roman Empire got rid of the pirates, so you were safe when you were traveling at sea or on land. They didn't have airplanes, so you couldn't tell. But the roads crisscross. They said it's incredible, the plethora of roads that bound the empire together. You know, good roads.
Was there, it's a silly question, but was there a common language that?
Well, Greek was at that time Greek, depending on whether you were what class you belonged to. You know, by the upper classes spoke Greek and Latin. You know, and then if you were like Paul probably spoke Greek. Very likely he spoke Greek and Aramaic and Hebrew.
He was able to communicate.
Paul was a brilliant man. Paul was highly educated. See, one of the things that happened with this Acts 2 that is remarkable is that the ones who were first chosen were not intellectuals. They were fishermen, and they were tradesmen. And in Acts 2 or Acts 4, they said, "Who are these guys? They're not educated. They're not trained, and look at what they're doing." See, and that tells you again how the church, how Jesus started the church through the power of the Spirit, not through the native intelligence. Well, maybe they were very intelligent, because that doesn't preclude you being intelligent if you're a fisherman, but they weren't trained anyhow. But they were trained in faith. They had the sacred scriptures before them, and they were men and women of great faith with the promise of coming through God's people, Israel. So remember, they were devoted Jews. They weren't just sort of casual people who were nominally Jews. They were fervent people, and that's why they followed Jesus along, because Jesus was a fervent Jew. So the languages they spoke, some of them probably many, and mostly probably just a couple. That answer your question?
Yeah, it just amazes me though, because he went so many different places,
Yeah, he did.
and if you didn't.
That's a very good question.
How could you?
Yeah. Well, he probably spoke Greek. See, so if he, and that would be the language. Remember something else. They did not go to the hinterlands. When they talk about the Acts of the Apostles, and you follow the crisscrossing of Paul, and his first was around Turkey, what is now Turkey, and the Israel, Samaria, Galilee. When they went there, what was I getting on?
You said they didn't go to the hinterlands?
They didn't go to the hinterlands. They went to the cities. Christianity was an urban reality. They avoided. They didn't go to even like Ephesus was the third largest city in the Roman Empire, and all the places that they went were cities. They didn't go to the hinterlands. They went to the cities. That's where the people were. That's where the action was. Isn't that interesting? But when you follow Paul's wanderings around, it's always to the city. Sometimes small, but always to the cities. That's a good point. I really never thought of that, about how they communicated, but they did. So, but remember, they went, first of all, there was no problem going to the Jews when they went to the synagogue. That was not a problem. But when Paul went to the Areopagus, and when he went to Corinth, and he went to Philippi, yeah, well, he spoke Greek. Anything other? Yes?
Can I ask a question about idolatry?
Yeah.
When we see a statue, I think that we can all say that we don't think that is the person that represents the person. But it seems in the reading that these early people felt the statue was the God.
Right, yeah.
Really.
Yeah, or it was a replica of the god. And so they would have it in their, amongst their belongings, a statue of Artemis, for example, who was the great goddess at Ephesus. And so they had a huge chapel, a statue of her in the city, and this is where people came to worship the statue. See? But then little statues were made by which people, and they would reverence them too, put them in a place of honor and like. But it's different the way I know that some evangelicals think Catholics worship statues that we have, and we know that's foolishness. That's not so at all. That they just the statue is an image given to us so that we can recall the holiness of the person's life. I still have a little statue of the saint, the priest who was the first priest in Korea. Can't think of his name now. I think it was Philip. But he how he was put to death, and they have a little statue of him. And when I was in Korea, I bought one of that, and I when I look at it, I think of him. Say, what a great man he was. He suffered martyrdom. So. But we don't worship the statue, but they did. And it was maybe we could bring that up now to avoid considering it later because it's a secondary level. But remember we said that Christianity was always talking about sharing of wealth. That's a primary thing in the Acts of the Apostles. A primary thing where an evidence of faith is the sharing of goods. It's just there all the time. And contrary-wise, where there is not that sharing of goods, there is a diminished faith in the minds of the author of Luke Acts. And we see that, because in some of the silver myths were being put out of business because Christianity was increasing in given places, and people weren't buying these statues. And so that's what got Paul into trouble at Ephesus, for one, because they accused him of wrecking the economic balance in the place.
George, wouldn't that kind of land to what
Leon?
Leon was saying earlier about the near riots, because he was messing up their livelihood and
right.
People weren't buying the paying statues.
That's right. They were, and he was messing up their work. See, and so and that's how you got the whole city up in an uproar,
Yeah.
because they were disturbing the balance, as Pope Francis is doing when he writes to the United States about wealth. A lot of Catholics don't like to hear that. They don't want to hear that, even though it's fundamental to our understanding of faith. Okay, anything other? Okay, well, all right, so then this is alone in the New Testament writings, Luke has given fundamental and programmatic expression to the nature of Christianity as a people of faith and as potentially inclusive of all humans. Because that's one of the things that he is going to, where he's looked upon as an apologist. He's an apologist saying to the Roman leadership, Christianity is not a threat to you. So he's saying that all the time. Christianity is not a threat. Rather, it's a way of deepening peace and unity. And then he's saying to the Christian people, and the Roman kind of system, that's not necessarily a threat to us either. And that's why in Acts of the Apostles, in Acts number 1, he has the story of the the good centurion, you know, whose son Jesus cured at a distance. And then in Acts he has the good centurion, Cornelius. These are not just stories meant to make us say, oh, isn't that nice? But to say, oh yeah, he sees how the author is saying, you know, these centurions are not all, don't stereotype them, see? And so he's trying to say to the Christians as well, now that's contrary to the author, whoever wrote the book of Revelation, that's contrary to what he said. Because in the book of Revelation, he's saying that the leader in Rome and the other sub-leaders under him, they're of the devil, see? And the author of Luke Acts, he's not saying that at all. Different place, different issues, where in the East they're being persecuted terribly. In the West, not so much. Even though we think always we think of tigers and lions in the Roman Areopagus, that were relatively few. But in the East, it was brutal. Okay, anything other? Good, very good questions, really. All right, so he says, alone as a potentially inclusive of all human beings. He has done so, moreover, in a narrative of force, so that despite every other dispute and division Christianity subsequently experienced, this issue never again required resolution. This issue of the Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians. For us, it's just an historical remembrance, really. But at one time, it was the issue and tended to divide the church. As other issues arise in the life of the church. And notice how they're solved. They're not solved by saying, what did Jesus say? No, they're resolved usually by saying, the Spirit and us. We, in deliberation and reflection, led by the Spirit, come to this conclusion. Because issues change in every era. So you never have one issue that stays with the church all the time. And so change is the name of the game too, and change is usually connected with issues issues that are very that challenge the people at a given time. So you can what challenges the church at this time? Well, we have different answers to that. You know, like one of the things they're talking about is this thing of what do they call it? Fellowship at meals. Well, what is the thing that's separating Christians today? And mostly on the side of Catholics, it's intercommunion. And so it's an issue that is just being brought up, but subtly, because it's too hot an issue, you know? Your fingers get burned. If you misquote me and downtown, not deny everything, but still, if you misquote me, they'd say, what are you teaching those people? Are you teaching that Lutherans and Catholics should intercommunicate? And I said, I never said that. They do. They do. So that's fact. But it's an issue that needs to be brought to the fore because, and right now especially because it's the 500th year anniversary of Martin Luther and the posting of the 95 Theses on the Wittenberg door. So they're going to be talking about that a great deal in this coming year because it is a burning issue because both Catholics and Lutherans both believe in the Eucharist. They don't believe it's a piece of bread. You know, if you go to some of the other groups, they say, well, it's just a symbol, something that, a sign, not a symbol, but a sign. For us, it's a symbol. Why? Because it's bread and wine, so those are symbolic, but it's also real. So you have that thing of it's symbolic, but it's real. And that's how both Catholics and Lutherans will look upon it. So all I'm saying is that issues change. Issues change. And the way in which issues are addressed is a lot of times from the level, from our level up. And sometimes they're addressed from the top down. But always it should be within the whole community. All right? Okay. Says, so that despite every other dispute and division Christianity subsequently experienced, this issue never again required resolution, nor does it in Luke's own story. Acts 15 is a watershed within the narrative because it frees Luke finally to concentrate almost entirely on the mission of Paul. Now that's what we're getting to now. We're going to come to the mission, the apostle to the Gentiles. But with Paul, it's mission. And I think that that's a word that now, more than at any time in my lifetime, is emphasized in the church. It's mission. It's that we don't, and the mission is not to just save your soul. The mission is to bring the good news of Jesus Christ to this world, because we live in this world, and this world is important. And we don't denigrate this world. It's very important. It's where we live. And so the world is important, and we don't just rush to eternity, but rather the goal is not just to save your soul or to save the other person's soul. The goal is to somehow make Christianity, with all its teachings and the depth of its understanding, incarnate in the world in which we live. So once we understand that, we have a sense of the sense of mission. That's what mission is all about. And that's why, like Pope Paul VI said, that economic justice is constitutive of Christian faith. It's not just a thing that sort of added on. It's constitutive of Christian faith. So just as we believe in mystery, we also believe in the sense of the significance of our wealth. So think about that, because that's, if you read Pope Francis, you'll get this time and time and time again. All right. He says, in that light, attacks may still come from the outside, but Luke wants the reader to see the church as it expands to include ever more the Gentiles, internally unified, with its first and most serious division reconciled. Okay, so now we're going to go to the Apostle to the Gentiles, chapter 15, 36. So Paul is with Barnabas, but now Paul is going to go on mission and see the brothers in the cities that he has formerly evangelized, and they say, well, let's bring John with us. And Paul says to Barnabas, no, Paul, abandon us. And so I don't want him to be part of it. So Barnabas and John leave, and we never hear from them again. And then Paul goes with Silas, see? And so here we see division, conflict in the early church. It's not just something that has occurred in our day. It's a reality. Why? Because it's human. All right, and so then, but the big thing in there is Paul also came across Timothy, and he wanted Timothy to accompany him. And he says in chapter 15, verse 16, verse 3, Paul wanted this man to accompany him. He took him and circumcised him because of the Jews who were in those areas, for they all knew that his father was a Greek. Well, now, why did Paul have Timothy circumcised? Well, the scholars conflict on this, but maybe one of the reasons is that his father was a Greek and didn't want him to be circumcised, even though his mother was Jewish. And Paul said, no, because Paul kept the Jewish traditions for himself and for other Jews who were evangelized. So anyhow, but the fact is that he did circumcise him. Okay? All right, and then nothing is heard of the other apostles, Peter and Paul. Peter, we hear of again when at the Council of Jerusalem. We see that Peter has something to say about how he opened the door for Cornelius, but James was the one who made the decision about having table fellowship with Gentiles as well as with Jewish Christians. It was James, who is now the leader of the church in Jerusalem, and Peter was there, but Peter wasn't leading the head of the church there. But then Peter went on. We don't hear much about Peter anymore. Only legend tells us that they think that he went to Antioch, that he went to Ephesus, and that he finally went to Rome. And there's good reason for thinking that Peter was beheaded, crucified in Rome. That's not legend. That's good, solid history on that. And Paul the same way. But we don't hear about Peter anymore. And so it's not a problem. Peter still had what he did. Well, we don't know what he did. Maybe he was exercising the kind of way, leadership, by encouraging the elders who were appointed in the various churches. We don't know what he did. So it's foolish to sort of come out and say what he did. We don't know. He was still Peter. He still had the role in the community of the church. All right? All right. And then we go on to chapter 16, and we have Philippi. He set sail from Troas. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't get all involved in the geography, of it. It drives me a little screwy. I keep going back and trying to figure it all out, but he has all these cities that he goes to, but it's enough to know that what did he do when he went to the city? He went to the synagogue. He was accepted by some, rejected by the others. He sometimes suffered terribly, beaten up, stoned. They had to let him down in a basket in a few places. He suffered terribly for the church. And so we say, well, I remember way back when, and they had the apologetics of Christianity, one of the things we can look at and say, look how these people stayed faithful, even to death. And they weren't screwy people. So you say, yeah, that's a sign that at least that they thought that this was of enough value that they even went to death for it. So that's one of the reasons why we look with awe and wonder at these martyrs of the church. And so here we see that. Here it was Lydia in Philippi, and she and her household had been baptized already. And then she said, why don't you guys stay here? So she and her husband were pretty loaded, so the apostles stayed with them. And that's another thing you're going to find in Acts of the Apostles. Unapologetically, a lot of the leaders, when they evangelized, they went to the people of the upper classes. Nothing wrong with that. That's just a way in which they were trying to get the affirmation of people who were successful, educated. Some of you may know something about the Madams of the Sacred Heart. Any of you know anything about them? Well, they're very sophisticated ladies who are religious, and they're all over the world. In Chicago, they're on Lakeshore Drive, and they have a school for boys and girls in grammar school, and then high school they have girls. Now, they're unapologetically reaching out to those who are wealthy and educated. When I was in Korea, I met the same group of sisters, and at first I was somewhat skeptical. I thought, they'd be hoity-toity. They were just the opposite. They came from, maybe I brought this up, they came from all over. The sisters, they had a lot of them at that time. They had, I remember a sister from Ireland, they had a Korean, a Chinese girl. They had people from all over. And their goal, the sister, and they lived simply, really simply. And they were smart. They asked me over, and sometimes on just a few occasions, I went over and just talked faith with them. But they were really smart. Boy, you could pick up the fact they many languages, and they unapologetically said, we're reaching out to the upper classes in Korea. We want to have their young women come, and we want to be able to give them something of the message of Jesus, knowing that they're going to be the leaders in Korea tomorrow. And maybe, just maybe, they'll be able to live out this thing, whether they become Christian or not. They'll somehow bring Christian values in. You follow me? So I changed my whole tune. I thought, these were remarkable women. They really were. And the only thing about their place was that you shivered. It was cold. And I had to wear a big overcoat because they lived so simply. And so whenever you hear the Madams of the Sacred Heart, and you know that they're teaching the girls up in Lakeshore, and in Chicago, at the heart in the Lakeshore in Chicago too, know that they're really remarkable people, because they're what they're doing is imitating what they did at the Acts of the Apostles. Unabashedly, they did that. Now, if that's the only place you went, that wouldn't be so hot. but it's not the only place. All right, and there's a certain, the slave girl that kept yelling after Paul, these people are the servants of the highest God. They are announcing to you a way of salvation. And that's when the people got upset. And it says the crowd joined in against the apostles. The magistrate ripped their clothes from them. They ordered them to be beaten, and after hitting them with many blows, they threw them into jail. And they ordered the jailer to hold them secure. He accepted the order, and he threw them into the inside cell, and he fastened their feet to the stocks. So here you see they're beaten for the name of Jesus. You know, how they're beaten for the name of Jesus. And then in the next chapter, they're going to be released, and Paul and Silas were praying by singing hymns to God. Singing hymns to God. That's how they prayed. And the prisoners were listening to them, and there was an earthquake. Now this is obviously a story, but now they're free. They're free from their shackles. That's the big thing, due to the power of God. And then the next thing they come out and said, and then the jailer was upset because he thinks that he's going to be, that he'll be free, that they'll blame him. And, but they, it said in chapter 16:36, the jailer reported these words to Paul, quote, the magistrates have sent to have you released. Thereupon, come out now, go in peace. See, so the author is just telling the story in such a way as to not get the jailer in trouble. See? Because they're freed already, but then he tells them it's like after the fact, you know, that they said it's okay, you can go. All right, then it said in Luke's narrative, this is important, the interplay between the divine plan and human circumstance is subtle. It is possible to read this section of his story as a snippet of the social history of the early empire, in the chance meeting with an Asian tradeswoman by the riverside, and the progression to the Jewish synagogue, and the encounter with the Pythian prophetess and her owners, and the near riot caused by the apostles being identified as Jews in the Agora, and their imprisonment without trial, and then elaborate faith-saving release. We see the multiform, pluralistic, and intensely vibrant life of the Mediterranean world of the first century. So the interplay of all these factors. Now Luke, in his great imagination, is putting all these factors together. See? And he's trying to tell us, take a look at this. This is the way things were then. And then now troubles in Thessalonica. So he said, Paul then, and they traveled again. They're on the road again. And they're traveling through Amphipolis and Apollonia. And they came to Thessalonica, where they're in Greece. And there was a synagogue of the Jews. And according to his custom, Paul went in among them. And for 3 Sabbaths, he held discussion with them on the basis of the Scriptures. And he opened their meaning. And he set out how the Messiah had to suffer and to rise from the dead. Now that had is a very important word. It's a theological word. And we could go on. What does it mean that he had to suffer? And depends upon your theology. My theology would say Jesus came intending to proclaim and effect the coming of the reign of God. But he was dependent. He was vulnerable. And he was rejected. And he had to suffer because he was vulnerable. Follow me? Other theologians would say, well, no, he had to suffer. That was the plan of God. I don't know if there was a plan of God. Someone says there's a plan of God. Whenever I hear that, I always say, well, in my mind, it means that God is present there. But what's going to eventuate, does this mean this is what God wants? Well, what eventuates is it just the convergence of circumstances and decisions made both by the individual and those other than the individual? It's debatable. It's debatable. You can argue it from now until eternity. But the point is that God is present in the midst of it. That's the only way I can understand the problem of suffering. I don't think when you go down to the kids' hospital, Children's Memorial Hospital in Chicago, and you see those little kids are dying of cancer, you say, well, God planned this. This is something God wished. I don't buy that at all. It's just the way of the humanness of this. It's a human situation, and so this is how it affected those little children. But God is there. That's the big thing. So that once you see that, then you're able to say, well, yeah, you can understand reality in many different ways. But the point is, you can make plans, and God would be with you if you choose this, and God would be with you if you choose that. You know? So God is still with you. You know? Remember when we were in the seminary, very subtly we were sort of taught, if you don't continue on and you choose, you better watch out. You may be going against the plan of God. And even then I thought, baloney, you know, against the plan of God. If I quit and became a lawyer, would that be something terrible? No, God is present to become a priest. God is present to become a garbage man. God is present no matter what you become. You know? So you have to think it out, it seems to me. Because if you say it's planned out for you, you got real problems. Real problems. The goodness of God. All right, and now he said, now they were still in trouble again in Thessalonica. Devout Jews put them before the assembly. That's where you're getting this, Leon, that the Jews are bringing them before the assembly, and they're punishing them, you know. But remember, it's not all the Jews. It's just a select grouping of Jews. Most of the Jews would have just said, "Oh, so what?"
That's the way it goes. You get, it was my opinion of you having problems like that, where you get some people say, "Hey, no, this is the way it's got to be." They say, "This is the way it's got to be," so they're going to be angry at each other, and it grows from there.
Yeah, that's right. So that's why we do depend upon our leaders.
Yeah.
We do depend upon our leaders. And so this is what happened with the Christians. And in chapter 17, verse 7, these people are all acting contrary to Caesar's decrees by saying there is another king, Jesus. And so they stirred up the crowd as well as the city leaders when they heard these things. And so they sent Paul and Silas off to Berea by night. And then they went again to the synagogue of the Jews. So that always Paul says, yeah, I know, this is the leaders may giving us, but I'll still go to the Jews, because why? And many of them became Christians. So it's not a question, again, of prejudice. But then they said, but they were more refined than in Thessalonica. They received the message with complete eagerness. All right? So there we see the differences. They go to the synagogue in Thessalonica, and they have trouble. They go to the synagogue in Berea, and they're accepted. All right. And said, in this section of Acts, we find the highest degree of correspondence between Luke's narrative and the information given by Paul's letters. One of the things we do have to bring up, though, I should have brought it up when they were arguing about the Gentiles and the Jewish Christians, is that Paul and Peter had a real conflict in Jerusalem when Paul, and from Galatia, from the letter of Paul to the Galatians, because there he withstood Peter to his face. He said Peter wasn't going along. He had supper. He was able to eat with Cornelius, but then he changed his mind, and so Paul got really upset. So here you see again, leaders are able to conflict with one another, and that's still going on. All right. In the riots they created at Thessalonica, the Jews bring against Paul the same sort of charges of disrupting the social order and challenging the rule of Caesar that the Jerusalem leadership had brought against Jesus. So once again, the parallelism. What happened to Jesus in the gospel narrative of Luke, what happened to Paul in the Acts of the Apostles, the parallelism. And that's going to continue on. So note it as you read the Acts. And we observe in this passage as well Luke's apologetic interest in showing the success of messianic movement among the, quote, better classes, unquote, of society. We talked about that. So he had success about the better classes of society. Now, I think that the next chapter, chapter 17, verses 16 to 34, I think it's important enough to read. So bear with me as I read it. Chapter 17, verses 16 to 34. While Paul was in Athens waiting for them, his spirit was irritated within him, because he saw that the city was filled with idols. He was therefore debating in the synagogue with the Jews and with those who feared God. Remember, that's a code. Those who feared God were the people who were attracted to Judaism by their monotheism and their high moral tone, as well as every day in the city squares with those who happened to be there. And some philosophers of the Epicurean and Stoic schools entered into discussion with him. So here we see Paul, according to the Gospel of to Acts, he's entering into discussion with people who don't agree with him, the Epicurean and Stoic schools. And it's sort of interesting to know that the Epicureans were very sophisticated, learned people, and they had a real sense of God and a sense of the moral order. And a lot of the wisdom that we find in Jesus is also found in the writings of the Epicureans. Same kind of moral tone that they had. Now the Stoics were okay, but then there were the other people. I'm trying to think of who they were. They were the Epicureans. They were the ones they disdained religion, and they tossed aside with the idea of God, and they were also there was no moral tone to their kind of writings. They just said anything goes. It's up to you. You're in charge of it. If it's good for you, go ahead and do it. So anyhow, so there he says, some of them were saying, what is the meaning of this busybody speech? And since he was announcing good news about Jesus and the resurrection, can't talk about Jesus without talking about the resurrection. Others said, he seems to be the proclaimer of foreign deities. So they took him and led him to the Areopagus, and they said, may we know what this new teaching is that you are speaking? That's a fair question. For you are bringing certain strange things to our attention. We therefore wish to learn what these things mean. Now this is a creation of the author of Acts. The scholars say it has no kind of historical reality other than this is what could have happened and maybe should have happened. But it's the kind of story that the author is weaving to tell how Paul is speaking to all groups of society. Now the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there like nothing better than speaking or hearing something novel. That's quite current, isn't it? Now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there like nothing better than speaking or hearing something novel. Paul stood in the middle of the Areopagus. He said, quote, Athenians, I perceive that you are in every respect exceptionally religious. For as I was passing through and gazing at your shrines, I saw also an altar on which was inscribed to an unknown God. Therefore, the one whom you unknowingly worship, I am proclaiming to you. This God is the one who made the world and everything in it. There is Paul as being a good Jew. Because Jewish religion always goes back to the fundamental principle of creation, that God is the source and sustainer of all reality. And we should never forget that, because sometimes we sort of skip over that. But that is the primary sense of Jewish religion. Since he is Lord of heaven and earth, he does not dwell in temples made by hands. Neither is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives life and breath and everything to everyone. And from one human being he has made every nation of humans to dwell over the entire face of the earth. He has set apart designated seasons and the territories for their habitation, so that they might seek God, perhaps even sense and find him. Indeed, he is not far from each one of us, for by him we live and move and are, as even some of the poets among you have said, for we are also of his family. Therefore, since we are of God's family, we ought not to think of the divine as similar to gold or silver or stone, shaped by human craft and conception. God has accordingly overlooked the times of ignorance, but now is commanding all people everywhere to repent, because he has established a day in which he is going to judge the world with justice by a man whom he has appointed. He has provided proof to all by having him raised from the dead. There we go again. When Paul is speaking, first it's creation, and then talking about the fact that we live and move and have our being in this God, and we are going to be judged, and the one by whom we are going to be judged is the one who was raised from the dead. There's no getting away from it. When they heard resurrection of the dead, some of them began to mock, but others said, "We will listen to you another time concerning this matter." So Paul went out from among them. But some men joined him and believed. Among them was Dionysius of the Areopagus, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. That's interesting, because the author is telling us, look, when the message is given, you're going to be surprised. Don't stereotype groupings of people. You're going to be surprised who's going to listen to it, even as Paul himself couldn't stereotype him. But even Paul himself. But you can't stereotype anybody. And so everybody should be given a hearing. And I've mentioned this to you before. When the missionaries go to foreign countries now where Christianity is not embedded in the people, in the past they sort of brought God to them. Now they say, how do we sense the presence of God in the midst of this people? All the difference in the world, the two approaches, all the difference, because the second admits that somehow God and the Holy Spirit of God is present in the midst of them. And so we say, well, let's take a look and see. Because we all know, people are good everywhere. And even as some people, amongst all groups of people, seem to have evil more than goodness lead them. So we always have to be very, not tentative so much as listening, in a listening mode, as we encounter people with whom we disagree. And so we listen and listen and listen and say, why? How do you come to that? And that's what the missionaries are doing. Now, there are missionaries who go, like there's one fellow I met him at Notre Dame when I was on a sabbatical many years ago. And I went there, and he lived in, he lived in, what is it, the country where it's in the Far East. It's, trying to think of what it would be. It's, what is the nation that is at war now, or has been at war with the Russians and, pardon me, Afghanistan. Well, what's the nation that's next to Afghanistan? What? Pakistan. There's this priest who was at the Notre Dame with me. He lived in Pakistan, and all he did, he lived in a village, and he had a little hut in which he lived, and he survived some way. I don't know exactly how, but he wasn't there to make converts. He was just there, and I said, well, what are you there for? And he said, oh, you don't understand. I'm just there present, and the people know that I'm a Christian and that I'm a priest of the Catholic Church. They know that, and I work with them. I'm present to them. And he said, that's my mission, just to be present. So I said, well, okay. It's different than anything I'd ever heard before, but that's who he was. So what do? You say, well, God is acting, the Holy Spirit of God is leading him in this way, so let's leave it alone. Don't argue about, wouldn't it be better if he, follow me? Because we tend to do that. Like a lot of people don't understand the mission of the Trappists, Trappists, they live a communal life. In the past, they never talked, but now they're able to talk now or more. But all they do is work in the fields. They become proficient electricians and cooks and and everything else, they have to take care of themselves. But and they get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was okay when you're on retreat, that's all right. You can do that for a couple of days. But I was thinking, over the long haul, not for me. So, but they get up and they have the hours, they sing the hours of the breviary, you know, and then they go back to sleep, or they go back to their room, and they come back again at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, and they have mass. And I'm thinking, well, okay, you know, everybody's different, but that's what they do.
Yes, Father George, Larry and I go with Helen and Wayne every year in September to the monastery in Iowa.
New Mallory?
Right with Mom's house.
Oh, yeah.
And it's kind of really nice.
I know, I've been there many times. It's great. And you get a different sense of those men. They're friendly, but they sure picked a tough road.
Oh, yeah.
You know. But they're men of prayer. And then they also have women, you know, in other monasteries who are called Trappistines.
Right.
And so they have women who are Trappists. And by the way, even though there's a real small percentage of Christians and Catholic Christians in Japan, they have amongst them, they have a high percentage of people who are contemplatives. I find that interesting. Maybe it goes along with Buddhism, you know, but anyhow. So we have to be embracive of all the different ways in which the Spirit of God leads people. And we don't have to judge which is the better way. We just say, well, that's the way they're led, and I'm led in a different way, you're led in a different way. That's the way it goes. Okay, any questions on that? But Paul is meeting with these philosophers, and I found that very interesting, that he recognized their goodness. So then it says, now that doesn't mean you're just, well, we're all the same. We're not all the same. But they have a sense of the presence of God, and we can learn from that. But then we go on and we say, yeah, but how about this Jesus, you know? Had a classmate, he was a wonderful guy, he died a few years ago. A really great guy. He was so much fun. And he created most of the programs of Catholic Charities, most of the programs they had for outreach to the poor. This fellow, his name is Roger Coughlin. I don't know if any of you ever heard of him. But he was pretty smart guy. But he was talking about another priest who had been our classmate, but joined the Dominicans. And he was among the best, the smartest of the group. And he said, yeah, you know what Jerry said? He said, I've come to realize that the only thing important is believing in God. And there was a good friend of mine, Leo Mann. He had real bushy eyebrows, and he said, what about Jesus? And he was right. So that besides God, there's Jesus. So we never want to sort of just pretend that we're all the same. That's the modern kind of way. It says, no more than in the speeches of Peter at Pentecost, or Stephen at his stoning, or Paul at Pisidian Antioch, are we to look here for a straightforward report of Paul's words. The speech, for all its portentousness, is as succinct as any other in Luke Acts, and like all the others, is entirely the creation of Luke. So, for that matter, is the setting of the scene and its denouement. As in other set places, we discover here not what happened, but Luke's idealized version of what ought to have happened, so marvelously wrought that for its readers it provided the emblem of what possibly could happen. How does that sound? Okay? Remember, this is a scholar. He's not denying anything. He's just saying, as a matter of fact, this is like all the other speeches of Paul. They're the creation of Luke, and they are emblematic of what could be, should be. And so then the believer, we're the ones who are really the intended audience for Luke. We're the ones for whom he's writing these speeches. So that we listen to it and we say, oh yeah, yeah, we understand how these philosophers could hold about the reality of God. But at the same time, it's not the same as believing in the one who was resurrected. So always we have that kind of balance. We never just stop with the way we are alike. We also, but. All right, so then he says, there is little doubt that Luke consciously set about to create the impressions he has. The difficulty for the interpreter is to avoid overloading an, after all, slender scene with more significance than it can bear, and to respect the proportion the author has himself assigned to the scene within his larger narrative. So Paul with the Athenians is just a sliver within the larger scope of Luke's, of the author's intention. Follow me? So don't overload it. Don't abstract this and say, oh, see, this is at the heart of it. No, it's not. It's just a little piece of it, and the author is saying, think about it. He's saying that to you and to me. Think about it. That a lot of the people we meet, they believe in God, and in whom we live and move and have our being, and we engage them in dialogue and respect them. It's not the end of the line, and it's not the all-important thing, but it's important. Follow me? Yes?
Is it safe to say that the speech of Peter was, it's the framework that occurred, and that the actual words and stuff like that are what Luke or the author
Right.
is.
Yeah, yeah, but he's...
A little bit of a historical framework.
Oh yeah, it's an historical framework, sure. But he's putting into it what they call the kerygma, K-E-R, and that is the basic teaching of faith. See, and that's going to be repeated time and time again. It's going to be the same thing. See, but notice Paul never speaks about Jesus' infancy. See, he doesn't speak about the infancy of Jesus. Well, why? Because Paul didn't know anything about it. It wasn't written yet. That Luke was written around the year 85 or so, 85 or 90. Paul died in 64. All right, but he's speaking basically the kerygma is the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. See, but not the beginnings, because that's all the poetry of the beautiful, magnificent poetry, but poetry. Okay, but you're right. It is the framework, but that doesn't mean there was never a talk to a group of philosophers. It just means that he may be creating the scene here in Athens. Why? It's fitting. Even though Athens by this time was not the Athens that we imagine, the Athens of the philosophers. It had lost that a long, long time before. It was sort of a backwater city by this time. All right? But the framework, how he's speaking to people of intelligence about this God and about Jesus. See? That's why, I think we've mentioned this before, that's why Bishop Sheen was such a significant factor on the American Catholic scene, because he spoke to people, very sophisticated people and very ordinary people. He was able to do that because he was able to somehow put it in such a way that people could grasp what he was saying. See? We're not used to that because we tend to be linear, and we tend to be just give me the facts, please. But I taught in a boys' high school, 1963 to 66, on Mendel High School on the far south side of the city, and it was and I taught the AP, the Advanced Placement in Religion. Those kids were so smart. I was able to bring stuff up to them. They caught it like that, and you couldn't repeat it. You go, hey, you said that yesterday, Father. Okay. But they got it, see, because they understood poetry there, and they understood better, perhaps because their minds weren't wrecked yet by just facts. They sort of were open to it, open to understanding. We find it hard because we have to change in the way we understand it. Okay, and that's why you're here. And you may not agree with what I'm saying, and that's okay too. But as I say to you, if you disagree, give me 2 reasons, or else don't tell me about it. Because if you don't have reasons for it, I'm not interested in it. But if you had reasons for it, well, that's something else. And don't use authority as a reason, because I'm going to reject that offhand. Okay. Yet neither should we miss the significance of what Luke has managed in this scene with the Athenians. If he does not creatively reshape Greek philosophy, he does something more important. He recognizes it as a legitimate conversation partner in the approach to God. He recognizes it as a legitimate conversational partner in the approach to God. He does not find it necessary to condemn the poets among you in order to assert the good truth of the gospel. The groping after the God whom all humans seek, whether expressed in statuary or shrine or poetry or philosophy, can provide the foundation of hearing about, quote, the Lord of heaven and earth, unquote. Luke does not construct or canonize a natural theology. He simply shows Paul picking up the inchoate longings of this exceptionally religious people and directing them to their proper object. The groping search is not itself the finding. That's for all of us. The groping search is not itself the finding. But it is of fundamental significance that they are called from where they began, just as were the Jews. From where they began, that's where we have to take people. That's where you have to listen to people. Where they are at any particular given moment. Because when that happens, then there's the possibility of dialogue, the possibility of listening, and both groupings change. But if you don't respect people enough to listen to them, and you think you have the truth, that's what one of our cardinals used to really say, we have the truth. No, we're pursuing the truth. We have a little smattering of the truth. We don't have the truth. We have approaches to it, and we have some of it, but we don't have it. It's always, the search continues on. Who of us is not different from 10 or 15 or 20 years ago? Are we all different? We approach things differently. If we're the same, it means we stagnated. But we're different. We take a look and say, yeah, that was okay back then, but how about now? And that doesn't mean we throw away fundamental truths like Jesus, Lord and Savior, the resurrected one. We don't throw that away. If we throw that away, we're no longer disciples. All right, then he says, Luke shows that the gospel was no more universally received by the educated of the Gentile world than it was by the learned of the Jewish world. Paul receives from these philosophers a mixed response. Some mock his preaching of the resurrection, and others simply defer decision. We will listen to you another time. Okay, that was pretty heavy stuff. Any questions on that? Anything that you want to ask? It's 8:30. Incredible. All right. So now we just got to 18, founding the church at Corinth. And the same thing, Paul says that if you don't accept what I'm teaching, I'm going to go to the Gentiles. Okay? Luke does not mention, all right, then troubles in a new recruit. Once again, Paul is on the rule. So now he's in Achaia, and he's in trouble. He gets out of there, and he went into the synagogue. He sails from Ephesus, goes down to Caesarea. So he's just traveling, and we're traveling with him. All right, and so now we're going to go to the mission in Ephesus. Just read that, chapter 19, 20, and you might have some questions on that. So read 19, 20, and 21, and then I'll ask you if you have any questions about anything in those 3 chapters, and 22, and then we'll go on from there because we only have one more class. So we're going to start from 24, heading toward Jerusalem, chapter 20, and then remember the big thing with the author is to be in witness to Samaria and Caesarea and to the ends of the earth. And for them it meant Rome. So Paul now has to go to Rome. So the way he's going to go to Rome is he's going to go down there, and they're going to he's going to be he's going to complain that he's being treated like a foreigner, and he's a citizen. So now when they hear he's a citizen, they say, uh-oh. So they send him off to Rome in chains. So he'll be in chains now from chapter 22 until 27. Interestingly, the author stops with Paul going to Rome, and we don't know any more about him after that. Why? Because it's not the intention of the author to tell the whole story. He's telling part of the story. So here we are, and we, like all people, are searchers, and we live in an imperfect world, and in a church that's also imperfect, and but still capturing the message, not capturing, but having the message and having it handed on. So with all the kind of stuff we have about the church, remember that it has stayed faithful in passing on the message of Jesus, and always for a significant number of people, it has been lived. And then for a smaller number of people, it has been lived in extraordinary ways. So that we are able to look at them and say, oh, the message is incarnate in so many of these people through the centuries. So it's not like we're living in a no man's world, where there's no signs. In the Gospel of John, Jesus has all kind of signs, and those signs. And interestingly, just a conclusion. In the Gospel of John, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus only works words of power when people have faith. In the Gospel of John, they have faith after he works the signs, because the signs point to who he is. All right? So let's conclude by saying the Lord's Prayer. Want to stand, please? And let's pray for our country, that it overcome the deep divisions and anger and cruelty that we experience on both sides of the coin. So let's say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Mary, Queen of Peace, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.